Hello everyone, this is Dave. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for watching as always. Today, I'm very excited to bring you a special episode. I had the opportunity to sit down and talk with Redwire CEO Pete Cannito about all the cool things they have going on at that company, as well as their most recent earnings call. I really enjoyed this one, so hopefully you will too. This video is brought to you today by all our wonderful channel members who you see during the intro of every video. Thank you guys so much for supporting what I do here, and if you want to join them, there should be a link down below. Honestly though, if you're new here or haven't yet subscribed, every new subscriber or even just like and comment really helps out so much as well, so thank you everyone who's done that. Okay, with that out of the way, let's dive into my conversation with Redwire CEO Pete Cannito. Okay, Pete Cannito, CEO of Redwire Space, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, first things first, I just wanted to get this out of the way. I'm not too sure if you're aware that I'm a Canadian, and we kind of feel that robotic space arms are our thing. So what's this I hear about you working on one for the Europeans?
Yeah, no, well, I think the industry recognized that Canadarm is the premier robotic arm in the space industry. So Redwire is, in fact, developing a much, much smaller robotic arm out of our Luxembourg office, but it is more positioned for things like rover-sized or lunar lander-sized spacecraft. Certainly nothing as extraordinary as the Canadarm. So I think you guys are still safe.
Okay, at least we still have that going for us.
Yeah.
To be a little more serious before we get into some of the questions, I did just want to be transparent to the viewers that I do own some Redwire shares. I don't think it makes a difference for this conversation, but just wanted to let people know. And speaking of the retail investors, I noticed you took a question from them on the earnings call recently and also did another interview on X. Is this kind of a larger plan?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Redwire, we recognize just how important the retail investor and powerful, quite frankly, the retail investor has become out there. So I think financial markets have evolved and institutional investors are still important, but particularly in emerging technologies with the proliferation of 401ks and internet access to information about companies, as well as the ability to hold companies and platforms like Robinhood and others. The retail investors is an important aspect, and at Redwire we want to show respect to that.
Great, I love to hear it. Speaking of the retail investors, I guess just from what I'm seeing is that a growing number of people out there, I mean, obviously want a good return, but also they really believe in that kind of future space and want to feel like they're participating in it, seeing their money go towards it, and also just go towards really cool stuff. And, you know, there's no shortage of that at Redwire. So, yeah.
I agree with that. I mean, and that's really exciting from an investor perspective. You know, I tell my kids as they're starting to put their portfolio together as young adults, I say, you know, invest in what you believe in, invest in your values, invest in the things that you want to see happen over time, whether it be AI or other areas of the economy that people believe in, alternative energy, for instance. So if you're a believer in space, and I think space has reached the level of being investment grade, at least some of the companies out there, I think it's exciting that people can put their money behind their values in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of some cool stuff, we recently had some images coming from the moon from Firefly as well as Intuitive Machines, and I think you had a role in bringing that to us. So how did it feel seeing some of those images and being a part of those missions?
Yeah, well, so first of all, it was an absolute privilege. And both missions were amazing missions to include. We were also on the first Intuitive Machine mission, and as well as the Artemis Orion cameras were Redwire as well. And some great imagery came out off of that. You know, it's just super exciting. I mean, in many cases, the camera is the mission, or at least the secondary part of the mission. There's a lot of great science going on. But these images are important for getting people excited about space. The only thing that I'll sometimes jokingly say to the team is I'll say, well, maybe someday we should actually give away the cameras for free and then just own the images themselves, because I'd love to have a nickel for every time those images got viewed.
Oh, I
But
bet. Yeah.
for now, I think it's really exciting that to be a part of that. So
Yeah. And very important. Imagine getting there and the camera doesn't work. It'd be something.
it's an important part of it, and there's a level of anxiety that goes along with that. But I think that's why people keep coming back to Redwire, is because we have that proven performance now.
All right. So the biggest news with Redwire, at least lately, is of course the Edge Autonomy acquisition. I think it was by far your biggest so far. Is that right?
Yeah, by a long shot, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to talk about that deal specifically soon, but just touching on the overall M&A strategy in the markets, I think that's kind of one of your core strengths. Would you agree with that? And what's the secret in finding these deals that work so well for you guys?
Yeah, 100%. Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the experience of the management team. Some people who build up companies, it's because they're technical geniuses, for instance. Other ones are people who understands things like M&A and are closely following where emerging markets are in their development to try to determine how you can position a really good company that can create enterprise and shareholder value. I think the latter is more us, although the Redwire employees that we have are real technical geniuses, and we have our fair number of them as well. From a management team perspective, is we are investors, and we're people who saw early on that there really was no middle market in space, and that the TAM and the growth rates for space made it a really important area for future investment. And so that's what we did. And that really drives our M&A strategies. We look for value investments. We're value investors where we can do accretive M&A. And by accretive, I mean where the actual act of doing the M&A, the synergies associated with that actually create enterprise value. And we feel that that's been our track record so far. And we feel that Edge Autonomy fits into that strategy as well.
Sure. Has it been a challenge with the public markets? They've been so volatile the past few years, especially towards space companies. I imagine just dealing with that while finding these acquisitions and valuations swinging so much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So public markets, I think, are a challenge because you get your report card basically every day, and what's on that isn't necessarily some fraction of that is many times correlated with the performance of the company, or in many more instances, the long-term outlook for the company. So you learn to not sweat the near-term perturbations and volatility as much. Obviously, we don't control things like tariffs or the overall direction of the market. And I think we have the right long-term mindset, and quite frankly, that's the kind of investors we're looking to attract. Anyways, is not the in and out in a quarter, or thinking about are we going to meet expectations on a quarterly basis. We're looking for those people who believe in the technologies that we're doing and believe in space overall, and how we're positioned in both space and soon to be defense tech associated with unmanned aerial systems. And that's what I tell people is the kind of investors we're trying to attract are long-term investors who believe in the full potential of those technologies.
All right. And so when you went public, I guess some retail investors out there feel like we kind of went through like a space winter. Did that kind of throw you off guard right after going public?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I think it was more of a SPAC winter.
Yeah.
If you could kind of, I was more surprised by the SPAC winter, to be honest with you, than I was by the space winter. We always knew that when you look at, every industry much like you have a product life cycle, you have an industry life cycle, right? And space is obviously an emerging market. So whether you go back to the turn of the century and you look at automobiles or airplanes or whatever, they each follow similar patterns. And in fact, one of the cases we've made for why it's really exciting for Redwire to come together with the unmanned aerial systems company is because the unmanned aerial systems market is about 10 years ahead of space, in our opinion, in terms of maturing as an industry. But in the early days of these markets, whether it's UASs or planes or whatever, you have a lot of companies that come in with a lot of really good ideas. And many of them are going to fail, and that's on purpose. And it would seem to me, if you were to go back and study these markets, that there's kind of this hype cycle that occurs where all boats rise with the tide. Of course, not all of them can succeed, so some start to fail. That spooks the market, and then you have kind of a dip. And then what I've been telling people, one of the things that I think Redwire is really positioned at, especially as we hover around break even from a EBITDA perspective and have multiple quarters of cash flow, is it's the survivors who then really take off because they've gone through that trough, and they're able to take market share as many of the companies that were either not financially disciplined or their technology just wasn't up to snuff start to wash out. You start to attract more capital. So that's where we feel we are in the industry right now.
Yeah, you mentioned that EBITDA kind of getting towards positive, and I know that with Edge, you'll now be free cash flow positive. I'm pretty excited about that because free cash flow positive, publicly traded, like new space companies is a pretty rare thing. So how important is that to you, and was that a big part of the deal?
Yeah, it's very important, right? Like, so when I articulate the deal, I focused on three core focus areas. One be the technological synergies, the other being the operational synergies, and we always hit on the financial synergies. Ultimately, what you want to do is create that virtuous cycle where you're generating free cash that can be reinvested in the business for good returns on investment, and that's a proven way to create enterprise value. So entering in that is key. Now, we always have to, in an emerging market, balance top line growth with bottom line growth because you do want to get as much market share as possible in the early years. So it's a balance point, but that certainly will be a tremendous milestone for Redwire if all goes according to plan this year and we reach free cash flow positive.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was a big deal. Do you think you'll need to take a bit of a breather to kind of digest it, or is it still full steam ahead with the M&A?
Yeah, well, so we're constantly looking, and it's difficult to predict the future based on, but it all depends on what's coming to market, right? We've certainly demonstrated our ability to do sequential transformative M&A, but you don't want to. I don't think we want to do too many deals of this size close together. But there are a lot of tuck-in opportunities as well, much smaller deals that may bring a specific technology or open up a new market or customer access. So certainly M&A internally, that process of looking at accretive M&A opportunities won't come to a standstill, but we're not gonna do anything too risky until we really have fully executed on our Edge Autonomy strategy.
Sure. So with some retail investors, I think some people were a little confused about how the drones fit into the space business, and I've read about this idea of joint multi-domain command and control. Do you mind explaining that a little bit to the folks out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is an emerging warfighter concept that's certainly not driven by Redwire. This is driven by our customer, both U.S. national security as well as other Western, particularly European ministries of defense that are saying, well, you really want to approach the next generation of warfare with an integrated network of autonomous platforms, whether it be on the ground, air, sea. Each one of these assets, if you will, operational assets, working in a stovepipe is suboptimal. And there was a really interesting article I saw in the Wall Street Journal, I think it was this week, that talked about this milestone that happened in the Ukraine, where UASs were collaborating with ground robotic vehicles in the first non-human assault that happened. I don't think a lot of people picked up on this. What an incredible milestone this is, that there was actually an assault that occurred in an actual battlefield where there were actually no humans involved directly in the assault. Of course, the ground vehicles,
It's fascinating.
Airborne vehicles were controlled by humans.
Yeah.
I think that's the future of warfare. The future of warfare is autonomous satellites and UASs, and then other robotic-like capabilities, networks together, working in coordination across what they call multi-domain on the battlefield. So Redwire's leaning into that trend.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense to me. And clearly with what we've seen over the past couple of years in Europe, drones are taking a lot more importance than I ever imagined they would. So I think that's a big growth area for sure.
Absolutely.
A lot of retail investors out there are actually pretty excited about potentially European nations increasing their defense spending. How do you think about the European versus the North American opportunity?
Well, I think they're right. Europe is very openly now talking about increasing their spending in defense. I think the current administration has made it very clear that they need to start increasing their spending to take on more responsibility, not only for the defense of their own individual countries, but for Europe writ large, to include the Ukraine. And so I think if you believe in that trend, probability is on your side because that seems to be very clearly where the puck is heading. And Redwire is super excited about that. Obviously, we have a strong presence in Belgium and Luxembourg. We recently announced the opening of our office in Poland, and Edge Autonomy has a really large presence in Latvia, and of course has hundreds of UAS vehicles already operating in the Ukraine. So those are all tailwinds for Redwire, and we're super bullish on European defense. Interestingly and importantly, is all of this defense tech, both on the space side and on the UAS side, in the case of Edge, is being manufactured in Europe as well. So it's European companies selling to European governments. And so from a tariff perspective, that's important because
Right.
it's not like we're trying to export U.S. national security capability to Europe. So we actually think that nuance is an important part of the current trend as well.
Yeah. From my point of view, I feel like, especially with space, I know everyone likes to talk about, commercials growing and it's really big. I still feel like having government and defense as like key anchor customers is really the place to be. Are you kind of leaning into that with Edge and with Hera as well?
Yeah, so we lean into, one of the nice things about the diversity of Redwire is it provides resilience, right? When commercial was the hot thing, we were able to lean into commercial. If Artemis program all of a sudden was awash with cash, we're well positioned to take advantage of that opportunity as well. So the same thing applies to national security. I agree with you. I think your assessment is correct. That the vast majority of the money right now going into space is coming from national security. Redwire, with the investments we've made in secure infrastructure, as well as the relationships we have, can obviously lean into that, and we definitely are. But it's more a function of the market trend than it is, and the agility of Redwire's strategy, than it is saying that we believe, national security is a better market. Certainly is one that's showing a lot of growth now. Internally, we spend a lot of time talking about multi-use or dual-use technologies where you want to make sure that the things that you're focusing on in defense can also be used for civil and commercial markets as well. And I think you've seen that with companies like SpaceX using Starlink commercially, and I guess they have a Star Shield or something like, national security. So those dual use technologies are really where I think companies ought to focus.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Moving on to VLEO now. So we haven't seen a ton of focus put there traditionally. So I guess my question is why now, and why is Redwire the one to be a leader there?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So when we started looking in 2024, really late 2023, at our strategy of what we call moving up the value chain, going from just subsystems and components, which we still see as key to our business, but going towards these bigger opportunities associated with providing a full platform. The thing that we wanted to avoid is being a follower and trying to go into a market where there's so many competitors that you're just entering a race to the bottom. And so, for instance, there's a lot of companies out there that have really good LEO buses that are part of this proliferated warfighter architecture, or like OneWeb. Trying to compete with them seemed like a fool's errand. So what we did is we sat back and we said, well, where's the leap ahead technology? Where's the next domain in satellites where we can go and we can be a leader? And that's what led to our investment in VLEO and going after the Otter program at DARPA specifically. We said, okay, we believe that VLEO will be an important orbit in the future as part of a hybrid or multi-orbit capability. And that's somewhere where we can go and be the leader, and that'll result in more profitability and larger market share.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess to use an analogy my Canadians would understand, it's kind of like skating where the puck is going, not where it is right now. I have to say, I think SabreSat just looks incredibly cool. I know it's probably not important, but reminds me kind of like old school ships almost. Is that kind of a function of trying to reduce atmospheric drag, or do you think about aesthetics at all when you guys build these things?
Yeah, I mean, do we? I'm sure the marketing team does. They love it when the engineers come up with something that looks cool. And
I feel like they hit that out of the park. So.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, and that certainly was, when we started getting into VLEO, some people started colloquially referring to SabreSat as an orbital drone. And it kind of looks like that. As a matter of fact, that's one of the things that was a bit of a catalyst for this idea of saying, well, how different is an airborne autonomous platform from a autonomous spacecraft? And is VLEO really the connective tissue? Because it is the capability that we're building is in the atmosphere. It kind of bridges that gap. So, yeah, I think it turned out to be kind of cool that it ended up looking like an orbital drone. But I can't speak to how the designers came up with that layout.
Fair enough. And I know, I guess there's probably not a lot you can talk about it, but this idea of basically turning the disadvantage of kind of being on the edge of atmosphere into like air breathing engines to try and stay up there, I find very cool. I guess that's pretty bleeding edge as well.
That's absolutely correct. The ability to have persistent capability like that would be a game changer.
So I think that has been one of the knocks on VLEO, is just how long you can last. I know it probably depends on a ton of factors. Do you have like a rough idea of how long these sats can last up there?
Well, it's evolving, and it really depends on the mission, right, and the cost. There are missions in VLEO that are specifically targeted where you don't need to be up there for a really long period of time, as long as it doesn't cost you a ton of money, right? You wouldn't pay what you would pay for $1 billion geo satellite if you're only going to get a year of operational capability in VLEO. But if you look at that cost versus mission outcome trade space, there are missions out there that could benefit. And like any development, going back to airplane or probably more recently electric vehicles, where it's like, the first time you get an electric vehicle, I remember when they first came out, it was like, you could only drive 100 miles or so. And then it was like, you had to recharge, and people said, well, this isn't going to be, or this isn't practical. But it's amazing how once you start breaking barriers, the capability grows very rapidly. So maybe early iterations may not have a long duration missions, but over time in VLEO, I think you're going to see it grow. And you can't get into the market when you're already there. That's not how emerging tech works, right? You have to get in early and involve, just like the electric car makers did, and go from there. So
Yeah. Strikes me that this would be more like suited to a larger constellation as opposed to one-offs. Is that kind of right? And how is production, I guess, on both the Phantom and SabreSat looking to ramp up in the future?
Yeah. So it'll be based on, we'll do it in a way that is in lockstep with market demand, right? So we're not going to lean forward and spend a lot of CapEx on mass manufacturing until, it's reached that point. So I think like the evolution of many technologies, you're going to see early successes, and then it'll ramp as demand starts to ramp. But, VLEO is just another orbit, right? It has challenges as well as benefits. And so I think it's going to follow the same trends that you saw in LEO. And in the early stages of LEO, you really had these highly capable 1 to 10 type of, actually a lot of people, unless you're SpaceX, would say that's kind of still where VLEO is. But these smaller deployments, smaller mini constellations, and then over time, VLEO is going to, from our perspective, we believe it's going to follow the exact same pattern.
Sure. And I guess to me, it lends itself a little more to observation in terms of being close to the ground, or is there uses for communications as well on that front?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, proximity can lead to higher resolution, or the same resolution at lower cost. Obviously, when you talk about RF propagation, the closer you are, the higher power of the signal. So that has benefits as well. Yeah, the closer you get. Now, we're not saying, we're kind of an all of the above. That's why we like to say from the surface of the Earth to the surface of the moon and beyond. We think that you're going to have a hybrid architecture. But VLEO, both on the comm side and on the Earth observation side, has a lot of benefits that are going to make it really worthwhile to have deployments in for specific missions or commercial capabilities. So I envision a day where Maxar and Planet and many of these companies will have constellations in both VLEO and LEO working together, serving different missions, providing certain cost points, providing certain quality of data based on certain requirements. And quite frankly, obviously I'm biased, but I also believe that UASs will have a role to play in that. Because at the end of the day, what the customer wants is data, and in certain ways. So whether that comes from a unmanned aerial system, VLEO, LEO, GEO, it should be a integrated network of capability that brings the right tool to bear to meet the data requirement of the user. I'd never heard somebody like a John Deere or some, a potential user or even the U.S. government say, "Oh, it's really important to us where this comes from," not which orbit this comes from.
Makes so much sense to me having up the chain all the way up the drones, talk to the VLEO, LEO, GEO, whatever, MEO, and beyond. So yeah, does anyone else right now do both the drones and the satellites that you're aware of?
I mean, some large companies have the capability to. Certainly, Boeing, for instance, has a UAS capability, and Millennium, they own Millennium, that has. Whether they're actually integrating or not, I don't know.
Sure.
But I think, but no, I don't. I think you could count on one hand. I don't want to say nobody but Redwire does this because someone will prove me wrong, but I don't think it's a really widespread capability. I think we're at the ground floor of these emerging concepts.
Sure. And then talking about the components a little bit now. So you do have some companies that seem to be trying to bring everything in-house. I look at a SpaceX or even a Rocket Lab. I know you work with them on, I think you're doing some antennas for their SDA satellites. Does that trend concern you at all in terms of demand for the component side of things?
No, not at all. Actually, I think you're going to see it trending in the opposite direction. And this has to do with this idea of industry maturation. From what I have read, based on what SpaceX has put out, and of course we know them, and we talk to them, and I believe Elon Musk himself has said that the reason that they did things in-house is because they couldn't find anyone who could do it at the value that they were looking for, value being a combination of the technical performance and at the appropriate price. And since he was really, in many cases, making a market, that's from where the industry was at that time. I think he was right, and therefore he was forced to go in-house. And that's worked out. I also think that Elon Musk has a special situation where he has such a proven record with Tesla that at the time he had virtually unlimited access to capital, so he could afford to invest in bringing things in-house. What we're seeing in the rest of the market is very different. We're starting to realize that the space industry has matured, technical performance is now front and center, and so you have, like you see in it, if you were to study economics, most industries start to migrate towards specialization, and people are been working really hard on bringing price down and being price competitive. So you're now starting to see organizations that are saying, well, I don't have unlimited access to capital like SpaceX did at the time, and the industry is a lot more mature, so there's a reliable supply chain there. So maybe we should go after it. And what I point out, for instance, if you take ROSA as an example, ROSA is proven on orbit through many use cases. A lot of money has gone into developing that technology over a number of years. To bring that in-house means, we're going to be continuously investing in it regularly. So you would not only have to catch up to where we are today, but you would have to keep going. And in that regard, most space companies don't have the capital or wherewithal. They should be focusing on investing in their differentiated capabilities. And that's usually, as an industry matures, what you see. So I think what you saw with SpaceX was pretty anomalous.
Yeah, definitely some pretty impressive growth from Rosa as well. And I did have an investor want me to ask if you would ever consider bringing the solar cells in-house for those rollout solar arrays.
We've looked at it. Never say never. But companies like Solero, now owned by Rocket Lab, and Spectra Lab and others, this is what they wake up every day thinking about, how to incrementally make one cell a higher performance. And there's other companies like Azure and others that are entering the market. So right now we look at it and we say, we recognize where we add value in the value chain, and we see that there's a reliable supply chain. So it's not overly compelling to vertically integrate for the sake of vertical integration.
Great. Okay. So I did want to get to venture optionality because there's a lot of really cool stuff there, to be honest. Starting off with Pillbox, I think it's a very fascinating technology. Maybe for people who are newer to it, you could just give them a brief high-level overview.
Yeah, sure. So when you look at this area of study called crystallography, right, which is essentially a fancy way of saying the growing or creation of crystals. Right now, when you grow crystals terrestrially, gravity has an impact on the quality of the crystal you can grow, as you can imagine, right? It's, the crystals are trying to grow, but they're growing against gravity. And that has an impact on the purity or the repeatability of the form of the crystals. Through many years and millions of dollars of research, simulated and really priming the pump from a commercial perspective of NASA, we've been able to demonstrate that through by building a facility and with the intellectual property of something like Pillbox, you can now grow a larger and more pure form of crystals. So who cares, right? Cool from a science perspective, but why is that venture optionality? Well, it turns out that crystals are critical in the drug development process. Although it's not exclusively drugs, people use crystals to develop all sorts of different products, but we've been focusing on biotech. And the purity and size and repeatability of manufacturing crystals leads to better drug development outcomes, because through crystallography and I think something called X-ray diffraction, you build models of these crystals so that you can understand the compounds better. And that's what proteins and drugs are comprised of these compounds. So it turns out that hundreds of drugs are sitting on the shelf that had demonstrated extraordinary clinical outcomes, but they had side effects that made them not commercially viable because of the severity of the outcomes, and the people who were bringing them to market didn't fully understand what was causing those side effects. So having a deeper understanding through these better formed crystals can lead to better drug development. Where does Redwire take this? Well, right now we are being paid, although we retain all the IP, to run these pillbox things. So this is not like deep venture where we're losing a whole bunch of money to develop pillbox. We've been doing this in partnership with NASA and others for many years. So that phase, that investment phase, is over, and now we have some really great proof points. So we're engaging with the biopharma industry to say, okay, we have intellectual property generated here that can lead to a better drug. What's the value of that? It's early days, so we call it venture optionality because, if you were to say to me, well, what is the projected revenue for associated with the ownership of this intellectual property? A year from now, it's really difficult for a company like Redwire to predict. We're not a venture company, so we try to make predictions that have a reasonable level of variability. But we like to point out that within Redwire, in addition to all the great subsystems and components, as well as the incredible platforms we have, now there is this venture optionality that as this technology evolves, we will create real tangible value.
Wow. I have to say, I was listening to the most recent earnings call, and previously I was never too excited about down mass ideas because I just had this image in my mind of you needing like hundreds and thousands of pillboxes going each way. But then I heard you can kind of develop IP and duplicate it on the ground, and to me that's like a game changer. So
100%. So
yeah.
I don't know if people are aware that Redwire was one of the early pioneers in printing what's called Z-Blan. It's same concept applies when you make fiber optic strings. Gravity introduces the manufacturing process, and gravity introduces impurities. You can manufacture fiber optic cables in space that are much more pure, and you get higher data rates, more bandwidth. The problem is you have to get all the material going to make these, kilometer plus long fiber optics up to space, and then you have to downmass them all. That is not the case with pillbox. Pillbox, you're creating a thimble-sized full of seed crystals that you can come down and say, I have, one of, or if not the purest crystal form of this that can be used as a seed crystal to create other crystals terrestrially, which we've demonstrated. And so that becomes intellectual property, that crystal. It's a very small amount, and you don't need a lot of down mass, as you pointed out. So
I'd imagine once you have those crystals, that would be pretty high revenue, or sorry, high margin revenue.
That's the plan.
Yeah. Okay.
As we're a public company, so we make forward-looking statements, and I
Of
give the whole.
course. Yeah.
Maybe I should have started out with, but the idea is associated with this venture optionality, which I think we've characterized in a very fair and transparent manner. To say there's still a lot to learn here, but this is not science fiction. This is not there's. But the idea would then be you would then monetize the intellectual property the way you monetize intellectual property in software, as a good analogy.
Sure. Yeah.
That it's the intellectual property that drives value, not some expensive manufacturing process.
Yeah. I find that exciting. You touched on something I'd never heard before as well in the recent earnings call. These golden nanospheres. What is that? What's the potential there?
Yeah. Well, so it all comes back to the same thing that in the future, we believe that microgravity is a unique manufacturing environment that has certain attributes about it that add benefit to manufacturing a multitude of things. And so because Redwire's been in the business of microgravity manufacturing for years, we're obviously the leader, or it's one of the leaders in that. So there's many use cases, and they all come down to the effect that gravity has on making things. So golden nanospheres are something that exists today. There's a lot of experimentation going on with building these golden nanospheres that, as I understand it, can be injected and find their way into malignant cells, such as cancer cells in the human body, and then they can be heated up. And when they heat up, externally, and then they heat up, they destroy the cell. I think that's the idea. But the problem is that in order for this therapeutic to work, you need to really understand the shape of the golden nanosphere. Otherwise, it can have unpredictable outcomes. Now, I'm not a biologist or a biotech PhD by any stretch, so I don't know the ins and outs. But that's the theory, and there's a lot of biotech PhDs in both academia at NASA and, of course, with our extraordinary bioscientists here at Redwire, who believe that a more purely formed golden nanosphere, and again, it's very small. This is nanotech technology, so you don't have that down mass issue. That if you can manufacture these in space, they'll have a really exciting therapeutic potential here on Earth.
Right.
Ideal.
Well, bringing it back to investing, if I, here any small portion of my investing money is going towards a company working on, making better medicines and treating cancer, I'm all for it as well. So, so all this is happening on the ISS right now. There's a lot of talk lately about the end of the ISS and deorbiting it. So how do you think about the future beyond that? And might there be a gap where you won't have a platform for your pillboxes and other microgravity work?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. But NASA has publicly committed to what they call a continuous heartbeat in space. So they're working very diligently towards having that capability. There's a number of companies that we work very closely with that are far along towards credibly building commercial space stations. We've announced our collaboration with VAST and others, Sierra Space and others. Actually, what I like about those strategies is they all should be buying ROSAs as well as for subsystem components.
Yeah.
And then inside, they should be filled with Redwire's microgravity solutions. So I think we're really well positioned for that. But the important thing is, and I think Varda is starting to work on this, is that it doesn't have to be a manned capability. These pillboxes require no human intervention. So I think the key breakthrough from Varda, if I understand what they're doing correctly, was this ability to have a platform, an unmanned platform that goes to space if they opened up their platform to Pillbox and it achieved the microgravity environment that we needed for it to function, certainly we would be a customer or partner there. So, and they're not the only ones. There's lots of them. Europeans want capsules to go up. Vast is taking a vastly different approach, they might say, to that you don't need this big permanent ISS, that you could go up with a Dragon and an inflatable, go up there, spend, I call it space camping, go up and spend, 2-3 weeks fill the entire thing with pillboxes, each with a different compound, do a whole bunch of, grow a bunch of crystals, bring down the thimbles, jettison the rest. That would be, I think, a business model that would work extraordinarily well for cost-effective manufacturing in a post-ISS world. So there's a lot of potential out there. So I think 2030 is far enough away. We're not too.
Okay. So you're pretty excited about the potential of future commercial space stations then?
Oh, 100%. I mean, this is where we believe humanity has to go, right? Like, it's time that we have people living and working in space because there's just so much benefit to that operational environment. So.
Okay, and I know you guys don't do launch yourself, but it seems like there's a lot coming online now. Neutron, Starship, New Glenn. How is more competition and hopefully lowering costs going to impact you guys, do you think, in the future?
Oh, so it is a tailwind, and I think a decreasing cost of launch is a real I would say leading indicator of the potential for a space infrastructure company like Redwire, right? Because as those companies compete with each other, and the environment is going to get very competitive, there's going to, especially when Starship comes online, you're going to be able to put so much space infrastructure up there at a much cheaper cost. If you think about our economics, we're a space infrastructure company, right? I always think to myself, like that cost of launch, when we look at the total cost of a program, takes away from additional funding that could go into capability, right? Because launch, once you're up there, it provides no additional return on investment. It has no additional value other than to get you up there. So if you can get a cheaper ride up there, the more capability, the more money can go towards capability, the more capability you can generate. So we're really super excited about what's going on in launch, and plan to be a big time user of all that capability as it continues to come online.
Sure. And I should touch on some of the numbers on the earnings call at least a little bit. So one thing that I think a few retail investors were trying to parse is, on the one hand, it was interesting, your pipeline is by far the biggest it's ever been. And then on the other hand, it looked like the backlog dropped a little bit. So how do we kind of reconcile those two pieces?
Yeah, well, so pipeline and backlog is one of those things where you have to just snap the chalk at a point in time, and they ebb and flow, right? Because you could win a really large procurement and your backlog takes off, and then you kind of burn it down after a while. And when something moves from pipeline to backlog, pipeline goes down. So I think it's something every investor should be watching to say, but I would watch it in combination holistically and say, okay, is there enough in the combination of pipeline and backlog here? Is there really enough what I would categorize as demand, pipeline plus backlog, to sustain the aspirations of in this case, Redwire? So I think that's how I would recommend people evaluate it. That's how I evaluate the companies I invest in. So.
Okay. So as long as both the pipeline and the backlog aren't getting down there. Okay, so I guess I'll just ask maybe one or two more questions. Your Hall effect thrusters, I think you're working on with a partner. I did have a question submitted by someone who was just curious about how that breaks down in terms of work and revenues. Do you have any info on that one?
Yeah, I don't think we've publicly disclosed that.
Oh,
but
no. Okay.
yeah, but the idea is that both us and Phase 4 are providing valuable technical content, and it's a key a gap in the supply chain right now that a lot of people are talked about very publicly in terms of the availability of these Hall effect thrusters, since a few of the suppliers, primarily Astra and others, have struggled. So certainly we wouldn't go into a partnership like that if there wasn't sufficient economic benefit if we execute. So without giving any of the details of the breakdown, if our Hall effect thruster fills that supply chain gap, which I think we're in a good position to do, especially since one of the kind of catalysts for this is, as a merchant supplier, all the customers who buy Hall effect thrusters were customers who are also buying solar arrays and star trackers and the other things that Redwire always sells. So people were kind of saying, "Hey, how come you don't have a thruster?" And we said, "Well, we don't want to. We got a lot of investments going on. That's why we partnered for it. But it'll create a lot of cross-selling opportunities. So it should be, but essentially, if we effectively fill that gap in the supply chain, we will see good economic benefit as a result."
Could they potentially be used on your VLEO as well as, Mako Thresher?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as it
Yep.
evolves, 100%. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that makes sense there then. Okay, I guess I've used a lot of your time, so I will wrap it up. I mean, is there any other exciting thing you'd like to share with us that I haven't touched on, or?
Yeah, no, I think we touched on a lot of the exciting thing, and the nice thing about Redwire is we always have, we're focused on space and everything. Our tagline is "Build above," so it'll as the market continues to evolve. We're super excited about a persistent presence on the moon. We publicly talked about Mason, our project to build moon landing pads through RF sintering.
Another really cool one, by the way.
Yeah, another great technology. We think that there's a lot of opportunity for us in lunar infrastructure. We're also excited about a pivot to Mars. We have programs that we've talked about. We just recently announced one out of Europe that they're funding a study for us on Lightship. We really think it's important, a message to underscore that Redwire is thought of in that way, that the ESA would select us as someone who could do such an incredibly important mission. Right now, our Vega 3 are up there, first two satellites to fly in formation, coordinating each other with really high precision. So we're taking on, we're not just a component supplier with venture optionality. We are taking on really sophisticated missions, and I think you're going to, with Otter and VLEO and others, and I think you're going to continue to see that. And then we're excited what Edge brings to the table, because we're going to have a total of 7 platforms from, like we say, the surface of the Earth to the surface of the Moon and beyond. And I would like to address one thing that I do see sometimes the retail community talking about, and that's this idea of accretion and dilution. I think it's important for everybody to really understand that even if you're looking at cash, anytime that you issue stock for an asset, that's not dilution, because you have the value of that asset. So in its simplest form, if you go out there and you're worth the number of shares times whatever the current price is, and you go out and you raise a bunch of shares at that price, you have the cash, right? Now, it's what you do with the cash that either creates accretion or dilution. If you spend the cash on some new technology and that technology doesn't do anything, doesn't return more cash than the asset that you issued your shares for, you will have a dilution event. If you invest that cash in a way that creates accretion and has a larger return on investment, then you have accretion. You're basically and that is how we create enterprise value. M&A works the same way. If Edge was IPOing, if you will, on their own, obviously they would issue a whole bunch of shares, and in return for that those shares, you get an ownership of Edge, we're doing a partially stock deal. So the stock that Redwire issues for the Edge deal means we get the value. Edge becomes our asset. So you're not being diluted. As a matter of fact, if you look at the what people use as valuation metrics like multiples of EBITDA or multiple of revenues, it's an accretive acquisition for us, meaning on day one, and those shares that were issued for the acquisition of Edge, those shares represent our ownership of their revenue and EBITDA. And if you look at valuation metrics, you see that we're creating value, not diluting, right? And I think that's an important thing for people to understand, whether because emerging tech companies, whether you're building a rocket or you're putting a constellation up or you're doing M&A, you want to be focusing on capital in order to grow. And as long as that capital is creating a future value, no dilution happens, right? So
yeah, absolutely. I talk to some people out there and they're always worried about, companies raising money or making acquisitions. Like, well, just keep in mind the company that you own now has a ton more cash that they can do stuff with, or, there's a lot more revenue coming in the door immediately. So yeah, important to keep in mind. And thanks for sharing that.
Because every shareholder owns a portion of that cash, right? So,
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So
cool.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. I really appreciate it. And congrats on a exciting 2024. And we look forward to seeing what you have in store for us in the future at Redwire.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dave.
All right. See you next time.
Redwire.
If you guys made it to the end, I hope you really enjoyed it. I know I definitely did. Thank you so much for watching. And if you aren't already a subscriber, please do consider doing that once again, as it is so helpful for the channel. I hope you guys have a great day and a great rest of the week. I will be seeing you soon for the next video. Bye for now.